Thunder Cove was once a peaceful seaside town. Until the Iron Serpents roared in. Overnight, their demand for protection has shaken up every shop, diner, and home. One more so than Luke Carter, owner of the community's Lifeline, Carter Supply Company. When a devastating fire burns his beloved warehouse to the ground, Luke's 92-year-old uncle Hank, a brave World War II pilot, rises to defend the town he loves. With old comrades, cunning tactics, and unwavering determination, Hank mounts a daring counterattack against a ruthless gang and its mastermind. Will Thunder Cove collapse in fear or rally for its greatest fight yet? Leave a comment and let us know where you're tuning in from. If you enjoy stories like this, hit subscribe so you don't miss our next inspiring journey tomorrow. Thunder Cove was the kind of town where life moved at a gentle rhythm. Nestled by the sea, its cobblestone streets and modest storefronts painted a picture of serenity. At the heart of it all stood Carter Supply Company, a bustling warehouse run by Luke Carter. For decades, the warehouse had been a lifeline for the community, providing supplies to the town's small businesses, everything from fresh produce for the diner to building materials for the local carpenters. To the people of Thunder Cove, Carter Supply Company was more than just a warehouse, it was a cornerstone of their way of life. Hank Carter, Luke's 92-year-old uncle, was a familiar figure in town. A retired World War II pilot, Hank was known for his sharp wit and steady presence. Though his days of flying daring air raids were long behind him, his spirit of leadership and service had never faded. Hank spent his mornings at the warehouse, offering Luke advice and sharing stories with the younger employees, who listened with wide-eyed admiration. For Hank, life in Thunder Cove was peaceful, the kind of peace he'd fought to protect all those years ago. But even the most tranquil waters can hide storms beneath the surface. Over the past few weeks, the arrival of the Iron Serpents, a notorious outlaw biker gang, had cast a shadow over the town. They roared through the streets on their motorcycles, their leather jackets emblazoned with a coiled serpent. Their presence was impossible to ignore, and their intentions quickly became clear. Local business owners began receiving veiled threats. Their demands simple: pay for protection or face the consequences. Luke had been one of the first to refuse. When Viper, the gang's leader, swaggered into the warehouse with his enforcers, Luke met him with firm resolve. "We don't need your kind of protection," he said, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. Viper had smiled, a thin, menacing curve of his lips. "Everyone needs protection, Carter. You'll see that soon enough." With that, he and his gang had left, their laughter echoing ominously as their motorcycles roared to life. Word of the encounter spread quickly, and though Luke's defiance earned him respect, it also left the townsfolk uneasy. The Iron Serpents were known for their retaliation, and many feared it was only a matter of time before they struck. That fear became a reality late one night. The air was cool and still when the first flickers of orange light danced against the darkness. By the time the alarm was raised, Carter Supply Company was already engulfed in flames. The fire roared hungrily, devouring the wooden structure with alarming speed. Townsfolk rushed to the scene, forming a frantic bucket brigade in a desperate attempt to save the warehouse. Hank arrived moments later, his heart sinking as he took in the chaos. The warehouse, a symbol of hard work and community, was collapsing before his eyes. He joined the effort, directing people with the calm authority of a man who'd faced life and death situations before. But their efforts were no match for the inferno. And by dawn, only smoldering ruins remained. As the smoke cleared, the signs of foul play became undeniable. Spray painted on the charred walls was the Iron Serpents emblem, a coiled snake with its fangs bared. Scattered nearby were fragments of a broken gas canister. Further evidence of arson. Whispers spread through the crowd. Fear and anger simmering beneath the surface. "They won't stop," someone muttered. "If they can do this, what's next?" Luke stood in the wreckage, his face a mask of despair. The warehouse had been his livelihood, his connection to the community. And now it was gone. "I should have seen this coming," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I should have done more to protect it." Hank placed a steady hand on his nephew's shoulder. "This isn't your fault," he said firmly. "The blame lies with those who think they can take what they want without consequence." As the townsfolk began to disperse, their faces etched with worry, Hank remained behind, staring at the ashes. His mind was racing, not with despair, but with determination. He'd faced threats before, ones far greater than a gang of bullies, and he'd learned that the key to victory was strategy, not brute force. "They think they can scare us into submission," Hank murmured to himself. "But fear only works if you let it." In that moment, Hank made a silent vow. He would not let the Iron Serpent's reign of intimidation continue unchecked. Drawing on the skills and instincts honed during his years as a pilot, he began to formulate a plan. This wasn't just about rebuilding a warehouse, it was about restoring the town's sense of security and teaching the Iron Serpents a lesson they wouldn't forget. The morning sun cast long shadows over the smoldering ruins of Carter's Supply Company. Hank Carter stood in the midst of the wreckage, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. The air still carried the acrid scent of charred wood and melted plastic. But Hank's focus was on the faces of the townspeople who had gathered to help. Their eyes held a mixture of sadness and determination. And Hank knew this was a pivotal moment for Thunder Cove. Luke Carter, his nephew, was crouched nearby, sifting through the debris in search of anything salvageable. His shoulders sagged under the weight of despair. "I can't believe this is happening," Luke muttered, his voice thick with frustration. "What are we supposed to do now?" "Uncle Hank? The warehouse is gone. Everything's gone." Hank's gaze hardened, his mind drifting back to his days in the cockpit during World War II. He had faced overwhelming odds before, enemy fire, impossible missions, and the constant threat of failure. Those challenges had taught him one lesson above all: retreat was never an option. "We rebuild," Hank said, his voice steady. "But first, we fight back. The Iron Serpents think they can intimidate us. They've underestimated this town." Luke looked up, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. "How?" "We don't have their numbers. They've got resources, firepower, everything we don't." Hank placed a reassuring hand on his nephew's shoulder. "We have something they don't," he said. "Experience, strategy, and the will to protect what matters. They'll never see us coming." That afternoon, Hank began making calls to old friends. He'd stayed in touch with a handful of his fellow pilots over the years, a group of men and women who had shared the skies and the dangers of war with him. Each call began with a brief explanation of the situation and a simple request for help. One by one, his comrades responded with unwavering support. "I'll be there," Hank said. Charlie Ace Walker, a former bomber pilot whose sharp mind was only matched by his sense of humor. "I've been itching for something to do besides crossword puzzles." "Count me in," replied Evelyn Red Harper, who had flown reconnaissance missions during the war. "These bikers have no idea what they're up against." By the end of the day, Hank had assembled a small but formidable team of retired pilots, each bringing unique skills to the fight. Though their hair was grayer and their movements slower, their minds were as sharp as ever. Hank felt a flicker of pride and hope. They had faced the odds before, And they'd do it again. As word spread through Thunder Cove, the community began to rally around Luke and his warehouse. Volunteers arrived to help sift through the rubble, salvaging what little remained and clearing away debris. Teenagers, retirees, and business owners alike worked side by side, their determination building with each passing hour. Mary, the owner of the local diner, arrived with trays of sandwiches and thermoses of coffee. "You're not doing this alone," she told Luke, handing him a steaming cup. "This town stood together before, and we'll do it again." Hank observed the scene with a quiet sense of satisfaction. The Iron Serpents had tried to break the town's spirit, but all they'd done was strengthen it. Still, he knew that community support alone wouldn't be enough to stop the gang. They needed a plan, and that started with understanding their enemy. Over the next few days, Hank and his team dug deeper into the Iron Serpents' activities. They interviewed local business owners who'd been threatened, pieced together reports of vandalism and extortion, and began tracing the gang's connections. What they discovered painted a disturbing picture. At the center of it all was a man named Victor Langston, a wealthy developer with a reputation for ruthless tactics. Langston had been eyeing the warehouse's prime location for months, hoping to turn the land into a lucrative commercial development. When Luke refused to sell, Langston had turned to the Iron Serpents to do his dirty work. "It's all connected," Hank said during a late-night meeting at his kitchen table. Maps, photos, and handwritten notes were spread across the surface, illuminated by the warm glow of a single lamp. The fire, the threats, the extortion, Langston's pulling the strings, and the Serpents are his enforcers. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, her expression grim. "So, what's the plan?" Hank tapped a finger on the map. "We turn the tables. If Langston and the Serpents want to fight, we'll give them one. But we'll do it on our terms." As the meeting adjourned, Hank stepped outside to clear his mind. The night was cool and quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos of recent days. He looked up at the stars, their steady light a reminder of the countless nights he'd spent navigating the skies during the war. "We've done this before," he said softly, as if speaking to the ghosts of his past. "And we'll do it again. For Luke. For this town." The fight was just beginning, but Hank felt ready. The Iron Serpents and their schemes had underestimated Thunder Cove, and that was their first mistake. Together, Hank and his allies would make sure it was their last. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to our channel. It means so much to us. Now, let's get back to the story. The charred remains of Carter's Supply Company stood as a grim reminder of the Iron Serpent's wrath and the developers' greed. But where others saw only destruction, Hank Carter saw an opportunity. He gathered his team of veterans in Luke's living room, the dim light casting long shadows over their determined faces. Maps, photographs, and hastily scrawled notes covered the coffee table, forming the foundation of their strategy. Hank leaned forward, his finger tracing the outline of the warehouse ruins on a map. "This is where we'll take our stand," he began. "The fire may have destroyed the building, but it didn't destroy the land. If the Iron Serpents and Langston want to claim it, we'll give them something to walk into, a trap they won't see coming." Charlie Ace Walker, one of Hank's oldest friends and a former bomber pilot, nodded with a grin. "What are we talking here, Hank? Surveillance? Tripwires? You know I'm game for a little creativity." Hank smiled faintly. "Surveillance first," he said. "We need proof of their involvement, something solid to take to the authorities. We'll rig the area with cameras and motion sensors. Anything they do, we'll see it, hear it, and record it." Evelyn Red Harper, a seasoned reconnaissance pilot, chimed in. "And the traps?" Hank's expression turned serious. "We're not looking to hurt anyone. But we can slow them down. Force them into positions where they can't hide from our cameras. Smoke bombs. Floodlights. Loud alarms. We'll make it impossible for them to move without being noticed." Over the next several days, the veterans worked tirelessly to transform the warehouse ruins into a strategic advantage. With the help of local allies, they installed hidden cameras in the surrounding area, carefully positioning them to capture every angle of the property. Motion sensors were buried beneath the ash and debris, their presence invisible to the untrained eye. Ace and Evelyn took charge of rigging the traps, their military expertise ensuring precision. Luke, still grappling with the loss of the warehouse, threw himself into the work. Yet, the weight of guilt hung heavy on his shoulders. One afternoon, as he and Hank set up a floodlight near the property's edge, Luke paused, wiping sweat from his brow. "It's my fault, Uncle Hank," he said quietly. "If I'd just given Langston what he wanted, none of this would have happened. The warehouse would still be standing." Hank stopped what he was doing and turned to face his nephew. "Listen to me, Luke," he said firmly. "This isn't your fault. You stood up for what was right. Langston and the Serpents are the ones to blame, not you. And because you stood firm, we have a chance to expose them for what they are. Don't lose sight of that." Luke nodded slowly, his expression conflicted but resolute. "You're right. I wish it didn't have to be this way." "We all do," Hank replied. "But sometimes, the only way to protect what matters is to fight for it." As the operational base took shape, the veterans began uncovering more evidence of Langston's corruption. Evelyn, with her knack for research and reconnaissance, dug into public records and found discrepancies in Langston's development permits. Many appeared to be forged, and the timelines didn't match the legal processes. She also discovered that Langston had made significant donations to local officials, payments that coincided suspiciously with zoning approvals. "He's been greasing palms left and right," Evelyn said during a late-night strategy meeting. "And those permits? Half of them are fakes. He's cutting every corner to get what he wants." Ace added, "And let's not forget the arson. The Serpents might have lit the match, but you can bet Langston handed them the gas can." The team's evidence began to pile up: photographs of Langston meeting with Viper, receipts tied to the gang's operations, and recordings of townsfolk recounting the threats they'd faced. Each piece brought them closer to proving Langston's guilt. The tension in Thunder Cove grew as the veterans finalized their preparations. Word spread quietly through the town about the efforts at the warehouse ruins. And while the specifics were kept secret, the community's faith in Hank and his team was unwavering. One evening, Luke and Hank stood together, surveying the site. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a golden glow over the ruins. The once devastated property now felt alive with purpose, a testament to the town's resilience and the veterans' ingenuity. "It's almost ready," Luke said, his voice carrying a mix of pride and apprehension. "But what if it's not enough? What if they find a way around it?" Hank placed a reassuring hand on his nephew's shoulder. "They won't," he said. "We've covered every angle. And more importantly, we have the truth on our side. That's something they can't escape." As darkness fell, the site stood silent, ready for the battle ahead. The warehouse ruins, once a symbol of loss, had become a weapon in the fight for justice. And with Hank Carter leading the charge, the people of Thunder Cove knew they wouldn't back down. The night was calm, a deceptive tranquility that masked the storm brewing within the ruins of Carter's Supply Company. Hank Carter stood at the edge of the site, his silhouette outlined against the faint glow of floodlights strategically placed among the debris. His team of veteran pilots moved like shadows, double-checking traps and surveillance equipment. Everything had to be perfect. The trap was set, now. They just had to wait for the prey. Hank turned to Luke, who stood beside him nervously clutching a walkie-talkie. "Are you ready?" Hank asked, his voice steady. Luke nodded, though his grip tightened. "I think so. But what if they realize it's a setup?" "They won't," Hank assured him. "Their greed will blind them. They'll think this is just another score." The plan was simple but precise. A false rumor had been planted through a trusted informant that a shipment of valuable electronics had arrived at the warehouse ruins, stored temporarily under the cover of night. The Iron Serpents, ever opportunistic, would be unable to resist. Shortly after midnight, the rumble of motorcycles broke the silence. Hank signaled to his team, and the veterans took their positions. Ace and Evelyn crouched behind a pile of rubble, their makeshift control panel ready to activate the traps. Motion sensors blinked to life, feeding a live video stream to the concealed monitors. The Iron Serpents arrived in a staggered line, their headlights slicing through the darkness. At the forefront was Viper, his leather jacket gleaming under the pale moonlight. He dismounted his bike, scanning the ruins with a predatory smirk. "Looks like easy pickings, boys," Viper said, gesturing for his men to spread out. "Let's grab what we can and get out." The gang moved swiftly, their boots crunching against the ash-laden ground as they approached the warehouse's hollow shell. But as they stepped closer to the supposed shipment site, Hank gave the signal. Floodlights snapped on, bathing the area in a blinding white glare. The gang froze, momentarily stunned. Before they could react, smoke bombs erupted around them, spewing thick plumes that obscured their vision and forced them to stumble into one another. "What the hell is this?" Viper bellowed, waving a hand in front of his face. From their hidden positions, Hank and his team activated the next phase of the plan. Loud alarms blared, echoing across the ruins and disorienting the gang further. The veterans moved methodically, herding the bikers into a confined area using strategically placed barriers and traps. Each step the Serpents took seemed to lead them deeper into a labyrinth of chaos. Evelyn's voice crackled through the comms. "They're boxed in. No escape routes." Hank stepped into the light, his figure cutting through the smoke like a specter. "You picked the wrong place for an easy score, Viper," he said, his tone calm but commanding. Viper turned to face him, his bravado slipping under the weight of Hank's steely gaze. "Who the hell are you?" he sneered, though his voice wavered slightly. "Someone who doesn't take kindly to bullies." Hank replied, "You've been running roughshod over this town long enough. It ends tonight." As the gang tried to regroup, Ace and Evelyn emerged from the shadows, their presence adding to the intimidation. The veterans moved with precision, cutting off any attempt at escape. Luke, though visibly nervous, joined the group, holding a recording device aimed squarely at Viper. "You can't prove anything," Viper spat, his confidence faltering. "This'll never stick." Hank smirked, pulling a small device from his pocket. He pressed a button, and a recording played. Viper's own voice boasting about the arson and his connection to Victor Langston. The incriminating audio filled the air, sealing the gang's fate. "Care to repeat that?" Hank asked, his eyebrow raised. Viper's face twisted in anger. But before he could respond, the distant sound of sirens pierced the night. Hank's team had already notified the authorities, and now the police were closing in. As the police arrived, the bikers were quickly subdued and cuffed. Viper glared at Hank as he was led away, his arrogance replaced with a simmering rage. "You think this is over?" he growled. "Langston will never let this go." "Oh. Langston's next," Hank replied evenly. "You can tell him that when you see him." The police officers collected the evidence Hank's team had gathered, including video footage, audio recordings, and documentation linking Langston to the gang's activities. It was a solid case, one that would bring both the Serpents and Langston to justice. As the chaos subsided, Hank stood with his team, surveying the scene. Luke approached, his expression a mixture of relief and gratitude. "We did it," he said, his voice tinged with disbelief. Hank placed a hand on his nephew's shoulder. "We did," he agreed. "But this was never just about the warehouse. It's about protecting what's right. And it's about showing people like Langston that they can't take what doesn't belong to them." As the first rays of dawn began to light the sky, the ruins of Carter's Supply Company no longer felt like a symbol of loss. They had become a battleground for justice, a testament to the power of resilience and teamwork. And with Langston's crimes laid bare, Thunder Cove could finally begin to heal. The arrests came swiftly after the showdown. Viper and his gang, caught red-handed with evidence linking them to arson and extortion, faced no way out. The recordings Hank and his team had gathered proved damning. But it was the trail leading directly to Victor Langston that truly shook the community. When Langston was taken into custody, his web of corruption unraveled further, exposing years of deceit and bribery. For the first time in weeks, Thunder Cove felt a collective exhale. The Iron Serpents and Langston's schemes were no longer a looming threat, and the town felt a renewed sense of safety. With the danger behind them, the focus shifted to rebuilding Carter's Supply Company. The warehouse had been more than just a building, it was a symbol of hard work and resilience, and the townsfolk rallied to restore it. Luke, with Hank by his side, led the effort, organizing volunteers and securing materials. People from all walks of life showed up with tools, supplies, and determination. Mary from the diner brought trays of sandwiches and coffee every day, while the local hardware store donated nails and timber. Even the teenagers who once saw the warehouse as just another building joined in, learning the value of community effort. As the walls went up and the structure took shape, the spirit of unity that defined Thunder Cove became stronger than ever. Hank watched it all with quiet pride. Despite his age, he contributed wherever he could, offering advice, coordinating efforts, and even picking up a hammer when needed. The warehouse wasn't just being rebuilt, it was being reborn as a testament to the town's strength. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and cast a warm golden light over the nearly completed warehouse, Hank found a quiet moment to reflect. Sitting on an overturned crate, he gazed at the structure, his mind drifting to the past. The fight to protect the warehouse had been a battle unlike any he had faced during the war. But it carried the same weight, the duty to defend what mattered most. Ace and Evelyn approached, their smiles wide. "She's coming along nicely," Ace said, gesturing to the warehouse. Hank nodded. "Better than nice. This place is a reminder of what this town can do when it stands together." Evelyn placed a hand on Hank's shoulder. "You led the charge, Hank. Don't forget that." Hank chuckled softly. "I might have pointed the way, but it's everyone else who made it happen. That's how it always works, isn't it?" As the final nails were hammered into place, Luke approached Hank with a solemn expression. He carried a small wooden plaque, freshly engraved, and held it out to his uncle. "We thought this would be a good addition," Luke said. Hank took the plaque and read the inscription. "In honor of Hank Carter and the veterans of Thunder Cove." whose courage and leadership remind us that together, we can overcome anything. Hank's throat tightened as he ran his fingers over the words. "You didn't have to do this," he said quietly. "We did," Luke replied, his voice steady. "You taught me that leadership isn't just about standing in front. It's about standing with people. And because of you, we have something to stand for." Hank smiled, his pride in Luke outweighing the gratitude he felt for the gesture. "You're going to do great things, Luke. This place is in good hands." The grand reopening of Carter's Supply Company was a celebration the entire town attended. As the doors opened and the first shipment of supplies was delivered, cheers erupted. The warehouse, now standing stronger than ever, symbolized not just resilience but hope. Hank stood near the entrance, watching as people laughed, hugged, and shared stories of the fight they had won together. For Hank, it wasn't just about the warehouse or the victory over the Iron Serpents. It was about the legacy of service and leadership, a torch he had carried since his days as a pilot. And now, he saw that torch pass to Luke and the people of Thunder Cove. As the evening wore on and the crowd began to thin, Hank took one last look at the warehouse, the plaque gleaming under the lights. With a deep breath, he turned toward Luke, his heart light. "Let's go home," he said, a faint smile on his lips. Thunder Cove was safe, and its future was brighter than ever.
Hank's courage and the town's unity turned a devastating fire into a symbol of resilience. How would you stand up to injustice in your community? Share your thoughts and this story with others. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.